Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled The Evolving Global AI Regulatory Landscape, Recent Developments and Practical Insights for Clinical Trials. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and your comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. At this time, I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event. And I encourage you to submit questions as well via the comments tab. Also know that all participants are in listen-only mode, but note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Clario, who developed the content for this presentation. Clario is a leading provider of endpoint data solutions that generate high-quality clinical evidence for their pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device partners. They offer comprehensive evidence generation solutions that combine eCOA, cardiac solutions, medical imaging, precision motion, and respiratory endpoints. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Dr. Todd Rudo is EVP and Chief Medical Officer at Clario, providing medical and scientific leadership across the organization. He has nearly 20 years of clinical cardiology and pharmaceutical research experience with a career predominantly focused on drug safety. Lauren Mistal is a business-oriented and solutions-driven legal advisor who draws on close to 2 decades of experience successfully resolving complex legal and regulatory issues. Prior to joining Clario, Lauren held senior legal and compliance roles at Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals and McKesson Corporation and was an associate at Quinn Emanuel LLP. And Marko Topolovic is responsible for overseeing and leading the strategic direction of artificial intelligence initiatives, including leadership of AI R&D functions at Clario. He has over 13 years of AI and data science experience in academia and industry, with a strong focus on the healthcare and life sciences industries. But now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our moderator for today's event, Dr. Todd Rudo. You may begin when you're ready.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for the kind introduction, Ryan. Good morning and afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As Ryan said, my name is Todd Rudo. Very glad to have the opportunity to host this interesting and quite packed session today, actually, covering the evolving regulatory landscape for AI in clinical studies. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to discuss the role for AI in clinical studies, how we're seeing this space evolve, and importantly, what do you need to know about global regulations and the recent developments that impact all of us. I'm thrilled to share this platform today with my colleagues, who I respect tremendously and are quite experienced in this space, General Counsel Lauren Mistal and our Chief AI Officer, Marko. Here's our agenda on screen. The intent by the end of the session is that you'll have a broader understanding about not just how AI can be applied effectively, but what are some of the risks in doing so? How can they be mitigated? And of course, as I mentioned, we'll be sure to help you understand the rules of engagement, so to speak, from a regulatory perspective as well, and how you can manage this. Why don't you go to the next slide? And you can go past this. And so just to set the stage, you can go to the next. To set the stage, what are we talking about when referring to the use of AI in a drug development program? So I've listed here some of the more common examples. By no means is this fully inclusive. At the earliest end of the life cycle, you're likely familiar, though, that AI can be used in candidate selection. So the ability to quickly mine large quantities of data, research potential targets, drug targets, and target engagement in ways that really, previously just simply wasn't possible at that speed. Optimization of study design, and more broadly, other elements of the protocol development process as well. Another common use case, here we're leveraging past experience to make, let's say, for example, accurate feasibility decisions when designing a study or protocol. Patient recruitment support, certainly another common application, leveraging databases from healthcare systems, for example, to identify suitable sites and patients. AI to support accurate data collection during study conduct, so reducing missing data or reducing low quality data. This is an area that we at Claria certainly have focused most as it relates to the digital endpoint solutions that we provide. And then AI for data analysis and interpretation, certainly an opportunity, of course, improving the efficiency as well as the accuracy of human readers as one example. This is an area, though, that has particular regulatory interest, as the implications for getting it wrong are far higher. Now you're talking about the actual interpretation of study data that could affect the conclusion of that study. And last but certainly not least is leveraging generative AI to support medical writing functions, as an example, informed consent forms, clinical study reports, all different areas that currently today, not future state, today, AI is being deployed in studies. So how can it go wrong? Well, data privacy considerations first, data accuracy, reliability, as I mentioned, uncertainty if a health authority is going to accept AI-supported analyses, perhaps even ethical concerns for applying AI in a human drug study. This all speaks to the role that regulations can play in ensuring the safe and effective application of AI and ensuring the clinical trials deliver trustworthy results. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. You can go to the next screen. I wanted to start, though, just by sharing some really recent data from the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development that they shared last month, I believe. They conducted a really nice survey of sponsors, vendors, CROs on the topic of AI in clinical studies. And this single excerpt here from that survey is focusing on the concerns that the respondents had when thinking about implementing AI solutions in their studies. These respondents were mostly clinical operations, clinical development, data science as well. So all kind of front lines of development, so to speak. And what we see are the first and second greatest concerns identified for the application of AI were data quality and the ability to trust AI or machine learning generated outputs. So also cited were IP and legal concerns, governance and data privacy concerns as well, and then specifically a concern for poor validation practice when developing AI. You can go to the next. I share that data as I also want to call out our AI responsible use framework that we formally established a couple years ago now, 2023, I believe. Why I highlight this here is to say that we proactively have been focused on the areas that recent Tufts data indicates as areas of industry concern. So we're going to be circling back around to this framework later on in this talk today, and so I don't want to spend too much time here. But I will call out quickly the 5 principles, starting at the top left here. So minimizing AI-induced bias. And as we actually wrap up at the end, I'm going to share some specific examples of how this can be done. Ensuring accountability and transparency as to how an AI tool was developed and how it's being deployed. Considerations around IP and data privacy rights. The importance of deploying appropriate risk mitigation strategies. Again, a focus here on how can we ensure that AI-supported results are trustworthy. And then, of course, our focus today, cognizance of the evolving regulatory landscape. You can go to the next. So what I'm going to be doing here and through the next handful of slides is share some examples of how we're deploying AI today. I opened this session with that long list of different ways we're seeing AI kind of across the full clinical trial life cycle, and this is going to be a bit more focused. What I'll highlight is examples each of leveraging AI to help protect patient privacy and maintain compliance, how AI can optimize workflows, so in other words, accelerating studies or promoting efficiencies, and then where I personally see the most impactful application is this data quality piece. So ensuring that the data that feeds into the final analysis of a study is accurate and trustworthy. I will go pretty quickly through the examples. If you're interested in any more detail in any of these, though, I'll remind you, you can certainly use the Q&A function to enter your questions in the chat. And then as we get to that section towards the end, happy to give a bit more detail on any of these as we go. I can go to the next. So to start, here's a collection of 4 different tools, all with a similar purpose, though, which is to leverage AI to reduce the risk for unintended capture of PII, personal identifiable information. So some of this is pretty straightforward, blurring video or still images to obscure the facial features of an individual, or using AI so a site doesn't have to manually redact text in a source document. In this case, the tool they just essentially load the document as is, and the tool will do the redacting automatically, and that is subsequently verified by a human. The real cool one here, though, is in the bottom left, which is the ability to redact facial features in cross-sectional imaging data. So for example, an MRI of the brain, which is shown here, you can take that cross-sectional data with software and actually recreate essentially the patient's face, even though there's no actual image of the patient's face. And so there are scenarios where we need to redact that, and the key here is doing so without impacting the readability of what you're interested in, which is the sort of central structures themselves, the brain itself in that case. I can go to the next. These examples both are about the quality of medical imaging data. So on the left, we see a tool that will automatically assess a set of images from a scan and check that the region of interest for that particular study was fully included. If missing, and the key here really is timing, in most cases, traditionally that missing, so let's say you missed the top slice of the liver or the bottom slice of the lung, that missing data may not be discovered for days or weeks when the scan is subsequently read. And the real value here is that the AI can assess this right at the time of image upload, which means that the patient is still there, the site staff is still there. There's an opportunity to quickly resolve that. On the right side, you see an example of our patient verification tool. Here, the concept is protecting against the inadvertent upload of the wrong patient data. So the subject IDs may match, but is it really the 2-week time point from the baseline of that same subject ID? Again, a human radiologist is going to pick this up in due course, but if the AI tool can do it essentially real time at the time of upload, that transposed subject ID, for example, could be corrected, reduces delays, reduces queries, reduces missing data. So really impactful tool. Can go to the next. Also a data quality tool. This one is an application across ECG data, and specifically for the use case of continuous ECG data, so Holter monitor type data. And this is a tool for quickly assessing the quality of that continuous long Holter recording without actually a human needing to load that Holter into the read platform and assess, from beginning to end how it looks. This is important because in cases where you may not be reading that data right away, but you're actually going to put it on the shelf and potentially analyze it in the future, you gain some confidence in what's on the shelf, that you're storing something that's actually readable. Go to the next. Last few examples here from a data quality perspective. Again, ensuring that the data that goes into a final analysis at the end of the study is high quality and trustworthy. These here are focused on respiratory solutions. So if you're familiar at all with spirometry testing, you'll know it's a very or highly variable data type, and the degree of patient effort for the test can dramatically impact the test results. So I can make it look like my asthma got better during a study by simply trying harder at a later time point than I did at baseline. That's problematic, obviously, when you're developing a drug. And so this application of AI is to ensure we aren't missing a sub-maximal effort from a patient and doing so real time, as opposed to overreading that flow volume loop, hours or days later. And so if there's a problem, the site staff is flagged, they can instantaneously, repeat the test, and you end up with a final data set that's much cleaner and full of higher quality data and less data that needs to be discarded because later it's identified as sub-maximal, for example. I can go to the next. I think just a couple more. As you know, the largest area of drug development is oncology right now. This here is a tool for pre-assessing, if you will, the chest CT data before the radiologist reviews it. So lesion identification and quantification that can assist the radiologist with their review. In part, this augments data quality, which is what we were just talking about, because you have a source for more consistency from interpretation of one time point to the next. But this also improves efficiency because you could, for example, the turnaround time from when the image is uploaded to us to when the result would become available to the site could be improved by this. On the next slide, I think, is the last example of a machine learning type tool. This is in the case of an ulcerative colitis study tool that we developed. So reducing variability in interpretation of a colonoscopy is what we're after here. And for starters, essentially you have a video of the endoscopy end to end, so to speak, which is recorded and sent in for central review by one gastroenterologist for the entire study, or one or two. And that in and of itself has a significant impact to reduce variability. But that's not the AI part. The AI part is the tool that can actually do a frame-by-frame analysis of that video file, pre-quantify for the assessment of colitis severity, and then present that information to the gastroenterologist, who subsequently is doing the overread. So not too different than the analogy, oncology analogy I gave, but the idea is that not only are you improving efficiency, but you also can promote data quality in the same time. Next slide. And so one last example to call out here, and that's the application of generative AI. So different than the machine learning based algorithm type AI that I had been speaking to until now. This is Claire. Claire is an internal tool of ours right now, homegrown, currently being leveraged mostly for document analysis. So we can take a protocol, for example, quickly extract key information we need, such as study population, indication, therapy area, primary and secondary endpoints. And importantly, the schedule of assessments. So we quickly know, for example, how many time points we'll have ECGs, how many time points we'll have CAT scans. You can imagine how helpful this could be when streamlining bid preparation, study-specific setup, within the different systems, the solutioning process. We can load batches of protocols into the tool to gain certain insights across a particular indication or therapy area. So really powerful. Again, at the moment, just an internal tool for us, but we're certainly considering some different customer-facing applications of this as well. So I think you can go to the next slide. Let's see where we are. Yep. So I've set the stage here for the different types of AI we're talking about, examples of how they can be beneficial for a clinical study. Let me turn over here to Lauren, who's going to talk about the regulatory environment in which we're doing all that work. There have been some updates both last year and this year as well, actually. So she'll share this all with us now.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. So as probably or hopefully many of the participants on this webinar are aware, we are in a new terrain in terms of the regulation of AI. And there seem to be changes happening just about daily as concerns regulating this very, very powerful technology. So if you go to the next slide, please. The EU AI Act. This is the first comprehensive law that governs the development and use of AI. It took effect on August 1st of last year and has basically a 2-year compliance period. This is, when I say comprehensive, I mean comprehensive. The Act itself spans over 420 pages. This is a sector agnostic law, meaning it's not just aimed at one particular industry area or application of AI. And also, this is a law that has extraterritorial reach. So really what the EU is trying to do here and has done is basically implement a regulation that touches any type of AI use that touches the EU. So the concern here from the EU's perspective is, even if you are an AI developer you don't have any connection to the EU yourself, you're based in the US or wherever in the world, if your AI application can be accessed by someone in the EU or impact someone in the EU, you are within scope of this regulation. So a very, very comprehensive and broad regulation that we're talking about here. There are also potentially significant penalties for non-compliance, monetary penalties. Too soon to tell at this point how that's going to shake out as the law did just come into effect. But the one thing in terms of the compliance period, the first compliance deadline actually just passed on February 2nd of this year. That was the ban on what are called prohibited uses of AI, and I'll get to that in a second. These are basically the types of uses of AI that are just deemed far too risky to human rights and freedoms to even be permissible for use at all. And then the next compliance deadline is going to be in August of this year when some transparency requirements around gen purpose AI models will come into effect. And basically what that means is a lot of requirements around validation and transparency in documentation. and the final compliance period, the actual full compliance will be expected by August of 2026. So if you go to the next slide, please. How is the EU approaching the regulation of AI? The answer here is, as I think I already hinted, very, very broadly. This is the Act itself has a very broad definition of AI systems, and also, as I already mentioned, has extraterritorial reach. Also reaches a number of different key actors in what can be considered the AI value chain. So not just those who develop AI, but those who might put them into this sort of the stream of commerce, distributors, as well as users of AI. Again, a very, very strong and powerful reach in terms of the Act. If you go to the next slide, in terms of the substantive approach here, it is a risk-based approach. And so what the EU basically has said here is, how do we look at the actual impact of the AI based on the potential risk of harm to individuals, particularly to the individual's rights, fundamental rights or freedoms. And so this is a risk spectrum. So the riskier the use of the AI is, or the potential harmful impacts of the AI, the more onerous the regulatory requirements are that apply. I already did mention the prohibited uses. So any type of risk that the EU has deemed could be just unacceptable in terms of fundamental rights or freedoms, those are prohibited uses. As I said, that portion of the Act did come into effect as of February of this year. Those are the types of uses that are in, any AI that's intentionally manipulative, that could be used to or exploit the vulnerabilities of humans, such as their social status, disabilities, any sort of protected characteristic. So the types of uses that I think, Dr. Rudo was just talking about, the fact that a lot of people just don't trust AI. From the EU AI Act perspective, these are the types of uses that I think humans would be most concerned about and most skeptical of, and those are the types of prohibited uses that this Act is trying to circumscribe. In terms of the next risk category, which is high risk, here you're talking about the types of AI uses that could pose a significant risk of harm to the health, safety, or fundamental rights of natural persons. Here is where likely most of the clinical trial types of uses would fall, because one could certainly imagine in the clinical trial context, right, there could certainly be a potential risk of harm to patients. And so those are the types of risks that would be considered high risk. When you are in the high risk category, when it comes to the EU AI Act, you can see the obligations are quite extensive. A lot of this really does go to, I think, the concerns around transparency, right? The desire to make sure that anyone developing these types of AI models for any high risk use really are clear about the fact of not only sort of what the AI is doing, but how it is doing it. So there are a lot of requirements around risk assessments, making sure that there's a logging of data, traceability in terms of training sets, validation sets, a lot of requirements for oversight and adequate human involvement to make sure, right, that the system continues to function as it was intended. And there also is an AI literacy requirement, which is that the individuals developing, using, or putting these types of systems into use have a minimum level of sort of knowledge when it comes to AI and the technology that they're actually developing and using. If you go, actually, we'll stay here for a moment. The one thing I did want to call out is from a risk perspective, and particularly as concerns clinical trials, there is an important carve out, an exemption in the EU AI Act, which concerns AI used solely for scientific research. So here, the Act does acknowledge the importance of being able to have AI used and developed for scientific research purposes to promote innovation. And there has been a concern in the EU, right, that there isn't a stifling of innovation as a result of this regulation. And so this is really an exemption that is narrowly tailored or intended really to apply to pure scientific use and for non-commercial uses. I would note that this does not mean that to the extent AI is used in a clinical trial context or scientific research context, that it means that the use is outside the scope of the EU AI Act or unregulated. If the AI system does qualify as a medical device or as a safety component of a medical device, it would be regulated within the high-risk categorization of the EU AI Act. And also, as many may be aware, there certainly are already, there is a very strong existing regulatory framework in Europe, particularly around medical devices. And also, of course, we have the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which from a privacy perspective really does regulate any types of systems or technologies and that could impact personal privacy rights. So I think there were in Europe, the EMA, the European Medicines Authority Agency, excuse me, is going to be putting out some guidance is expected there in terms of the different ways that AI could be used or qualify as a medical device. And I think that that is really going to be important, particularly as we look to see how things shake out in terms of the interplay between the EU AI Act and the whole regulatory framework that already exists around medical devices. But again, the main question is going to continue to be around the impact on patients and patient safety. If you go next to the next slide, please. So what is going on in the United States? Well, in the United States, there is no law at this point, no formal regulation that is in effect. We do, however, have a series of guidance documents that have been put out by FDA in particular. And the latest came out in January of this year. This is, I want to be clear, non-binding guidance. So in January of this year, the FDA did put out a paper, a white paper called Considerations for the Use of AI to Support Regulatory Decision-Making for Drug and Biological Products. And this is guidance for industry and other interested parties. So that's a bit of a mouthful. But what this really is the FDA's attempt to provide some guardrails around the use of AI, particularly in the drug development process. What's important to note here in terms of scope is the FDA actually has been pretty vocal in making clear that their real goal is to regulate the types of AI uses that really could be used for decision-making, regulatory decision-making regarding the safety, effectiveness, or quality of a drug product. So FDA has been pretty clear that they do not consider AI uses that are purely for efficiency purposes or operational purposes to be within the scope of their regulatory authority. So that is an important, sort of framework because I think the FDA has acknowledged that there are a number of different, sort of very operational types of uses of AI that really don't necessarily impact safety, or efficacy or anything like that in terms of the drug development decision-making process. And they've been very clear that that's really going to be outside of the scope. So one could think of an example like one thinks of protocols or all the documentation around a clinical trial. A type of AI use that would be to simply organize or scour, all of that documentation and analyze it would likely be considered more of an operational type of use than it would be an actual decision-making. Decision-making might be something more along the lines of, how much of a dose should be administered in a trial, right? One could see that that could have a direct implication on the safety of a patient. So again, FDA, I think that the biggest thing here to note is that they are really trying to walk this line and be clear about what they think is going to be within the scope of regulation and what would not. They've put forth a risk-based credibility assessment framework. You can find this guidance paper on the FDA's website. I would note that it's interesting, from, again, similar to the EU AI Act, the look here or the vantage point here really is a risk-based approach also. And they are encouraging that the first question that be asked is you sort of start with this very rational framework. The first thing is to develop or define, what is considered the question of interest. That really is, just asking, what is this AI intended to do? Why are we using this AI, or why are we developing this AI tool? And what problem is it solving? So the FDA really encourages that to be the threshold question. So example, right, is it to streamline the paperwork process, or is it to figure out what dosage to give a patient, right? That would sort of be the problem that the AI is intended to solve. And then from there, the FDA encourages or guides that there should be a determination of the context for the use of that AI. And that would be defining what the specific role of the AI tool is in addressing what's called the question of interest. And then from there, an actual risk mitigation framework would need to be developed. So again, I encourage everyone to take a look at the guidance paper. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I do want to again emphasize this is guidance, but it is, you know, important information that we have from FDA in terms of how they are approaching the use of AI in the drug development and research process. If you go to the next slide, please. Wanted to give everyone just a sense that it's not just Europe or the US that are grappling with questions around the use of AI and how to regulate the same. This is a very truncated sort of survey of the different countries that have either put out guidance already or in fact have put out some sort of AI specific regulation. You can see it's quite broad. A number of countries have already been very vocal in terms of their own desire to regulate this technology. And of course, as one might expect, as happened with GDPR and its aftermath, a lot of these countries are looking to the EU AI Act for guidance to see how things are being approached and how compliance tracks with regards to that global regulation. Excuse me, that EU regulation. And so if you go to the next slide, please. Just, you know, circling back to Clario's own commitment to the responsible use of AI, I was really excited to partner with different stakeholders across the company a couple years ago, as Todd mentioned, to develop these guidelines, which we have found as the regulations have been coming into force, really do fit well within the framework that the EU has developed and that we're seeing other regulators globally putting forth. So for Clario, our commitment is a strong one, which is to ensure that we are accountable in our development and use of AI, partnering with Marco, who's up next here on this presentation. We are ensuring that we are documenting things very, you know, strongly in terms of data sets, training data sets, validation, having human oversight into the different development processes, as well as continually checking and making sure that the outputs are as one would expect them to be. We are committed to privacy from a privacy perspective, right? You know, the AI uses, you know, anonymizing the data is really a critical part of ensuring that we are able to protect patient privacy. And, you know, we are always making sure that we are doing our best to use the most robust data sets, right, to minimize bias in the AI development and output process. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, our Chief AI Officer, Marco Topalovic.
Thank you, Lauren. Actually, thanks to you and to Todd as well for such a powerful setting of the scene. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. It depends, of course, where you're coming from. In the following slides, I will try to show you a little bit different perspective. I will try to show you the perspective of the developers team or the engineering team on the whole regulatory landscape. Next slide, please. So if you look into the current AI landscape at Clario, what is important to notice is that AI is actually not new to Clario, even though there's much more focus on it in the last years. Since 2018, Clario has started exploring this technology and its benefits. And over the years to come, we improved our internal infrastructures. We improved our how do we deploy models, how are we training the models, and everything. In the last 2 years, we see a boom of new use cases in the AI. And finally, as well as Todd also mentioned, we introduced the generative AI capabilities as well within our company. But what is important to notice is that in total, we have more than 50 models that we now release, that we have over the years released into the production. And out of them, more than 30 models are actually used actively in our platforms within the studies. And for us as a team and as a company, the important information is not how many models are we using actually, but are we making serious impact with those models. So we're very happy and motivated to see that until today, Clario AI models are part of more than 800 clinical trials, and those clinical trials are utilizing the models in a production and actually benefiting from the value that these models are able to deliver. If you look into the next slide, again, as I said, this part of the presentation is the perspective of the engineering team. So the initial reaction, obviously, when the FDA or AI Act is publishing the documentation, is that we as a team, but also companies in general, are experiencing certain fear. So companies are afraid of more regulations, and is this going to be a roadblocker for innovation or a vehicle that's going to make AI breakthroughs even more expensive? However, from my personal perspective, what we're missing to see is actually that the click, please. The regulators are actually giving us the roadmap how to start using AI and become successful with it. So in my personal eyes, regulators came in and says, hey, companies, we're giving you tools how to remove that fear from you and your customers to use AI in the future. And if we look, click, please. Why all of that? Because we are living in a certain world where it feels much easier and safer for us as individuals to use AI, and we're using it everywhere. If you're coming back home, we're going to use Waze to advise us which roads to take. We're going to use the noise canceling or any kind of earphones when we are listening music or something. We're going to have a Face ID when we are opening our iPhones. Netflix to tell us what kind of movie to watch next. So all of these technologies are having something in common, and that's that they have an AI as an engine that is driving them behind the scene. And it's very interesting to observe that as individuals, we are feeling very fine and safe to use it, whereas as the companies, we are more conservative, and we are looking for the ways to make us feel safe. And that's why I'm saying, if you click through, please. This is why I'm saying that the regulators actually gave us the tools to make us feel comfortable and safe as the enterprise to deal with the AI the same way we are dealing with it as the individuals, both in a way as a companies who are producing AI, but also as a company who are users of the AI. Next slide, please. So for the developers at Clario, compliance with the regulation is obviously crucial, and particularly because we operate in the life science industry, which is heavily regulated from all directions. So what is important for us as developers is that we have a good data governance. So data quality, data integrity, data accuracy when developing AI models is extremely important for us. We need to know where the data coming from, who labeled it, how did it label it. We need to make sure that everything is robust and obviously free from the bias. So we really need to have a great data governance. As Lauren explained, we need to also as well do good risk assessment. We need to understand where is our AI coming, which systems, which level of the risk we are going to apply for, and we need to as well we need to see because from our perspective, the next mechanism that we're going to build further is going to depend as well from the category we are falling to. The third thing that we need to observe focusly is the transparency and the human oversight, because obviously we need to develop the AI that is transparent and explainable to the users. We need to use the mechanisms to get to that, but we also need to build the mechanisms to follow or allow actually AI human oversights during the development process. So is it during the training of the algorithms? Obviously, this is all done with the supervision of the humans. Is it in validation of the algorithms, or is it during the operational use of the algorithm? So this all needs to have mechanisms for the human oversight. Finally, as well, documentation is very important. So at every stage of our AI lifecycle, is it development, testing, validation, or deployment, we need to build different type of documentation, and that's all these regulations didn't come as a surprise for us, obviously, because as a company we have number of standards to comply with. So documentation is anyway part of our company DNA. In any case, what is sure that all of these boxes is not done as independently on the responsibility of the AI team. This is always done as a cross-functional collaboration with all different teams. So is it the science team, the R&D team for the next integration phase? Is it the legal team, quality and regulatory, commercial, IT security? We collaborate actually on all these aspects with all different teams. Next slide, please. So going back to to something similar that Lauren already explained, but showing it from our perspective. Obviously, for our team, is important to assess the level of risks and what does it mean for us when we're building different systems. So what kind of next steps are we going to take, and what kind of communication within the Clario is going to be about this? So if you look at the overall Clario AI systems, majority of the systems are going to fall actually in two categories. Is it going to be a category called the high risk bucket or the low risk or limited risk bucket? And on top of the regulatory assessment on the AI perspective, what we need to do is as well look into the intended use of such a system or product service to understand what additional things we need to do when we are building documentation and different mechanisms. So let me explain that through two examples. So, for example, one AI system that we have at Clario is a diagnostic product. So such product helps doctors to diagnose respiratory diseases with AI, suggesting what is the most probable disease that the patient has. And such model is actually a high risk model. It's also a model that is a medical device, and for that perspective, we need to follow different routes. So we need to follow the conformity assessment, transparency, post-marketing surveillance, and so on. On the other hand, another very interesting and successful product actually that Todd also mentioned in his slide is the AI system for the spirometry quality control. So this product analyzes quality of collected data using AI. So AI essentially mimics the human level assessment of what is good performed test and what is bad performed test. So in that case, the system actually doesn't have any impact on the patient himself, rather on the collected data for the trial. And for that, we should follow a limited risk route. Next slide, please. This is as well an interesting concept that we need to understand, and took me a while to understand how important it is. Because for me, as a developer, that was a very logical concept, but I'm realizing how important it is. So it's a concept between the self-learning AI and static AI. So imagine now we are deploying an AI model in an environment. Let's call it model 1.0. So that model we are using now in the trial, it gets exposed to the new data, and such model has a potential to learn from the new patterns in the new data. And suddenly, after a time, that we get to ask, is this model actually 1.0 or is it a different type of model? We see this kind of AI becoming a self-learning AI, and that's what we're seeing if you're using, I don't know, Facebook, TikTok, and everything. It's an AI that is learning from the behavior and try to adjust its output based on the learnings. However, in our sector of clinical trials, we need to ask the questions: is actually this 1.0 model the same as this new 1.0 model? Is it giving us the same response? Because consistency during the trial is very important. Do we know if these newly discovered patterns are actually even relevant for us? Do they contain the bias? Is it even clinically correct? We need to assess as well, did we have a contractual permission to learn from those new patterns? And did the specific use case, why are we using AI, actually, is it even relevant use case for the clinical trial? So majority of these things can be mitigated regulatory, but still it requires very intensive monitoring and communication, and clinical trials are operating in a very strict and dynamic regulatory landscape. That's why actually at Clario, we're using, click please, we are using different approach. we're using always the static AI models. So that means we are deploying the AI model in a production. Let's again call it 1.0. And that model gets exposed to a production data, but it does not change. It still stays the same model. What we are doing in our monitoring systems is that we are still in the background monitoring whether the model is performing the same way it should be performed. We have opportunity to communicate with our experts who are, to see whether the responses make sense. We have our own additional validations that we are performing if needed, and simply all of that to observe the behavior of the model in a production. And then if we click through, then if needed, if we see any changes on the deterioration of the models, we have an opportunity to discuss, define, and validate, do we need a specific new training datasets expansion, and we can retrain and improve the model. And such model actually is becoming a new model. It's called, like in this case, for the sake of the example, it's called 1.1. And that model is going to use then in the future for the future clinical trials. But for the started clinical trial, we are not by default going to change the model, because we want to ensure there's a consistency in the trial, because the output we were giving in the past, we want to stay across the whole trial the same output. And we need that obviously to do because we want to be transparent with our models. We want to also have opportunity for traceability and so on. So I hope this clarifies. Next slide, please. Other important concepts. We have a couple of more important concepts for the best practices. And actually, to understand the best practices, we just need to understand as well the key concepts that we need to follow, and that's bias detection, fairness testing, continuous model monitoring, explainability and interpretability, and human oversight. Because as we all say, we're not going to let AI just learn from itself. It needs to learn by telling it what to learn. So for all of that, we have a certain dedicated compliance framework. Next slide, please. So particularly on specific points, if you look for the bias and fairness, what we are working towards is installing a dedicated framework for testing that ensures fairness throughout the development process. For example, we are always observing the demographic parity. Is it used to ensure equal treatment across different groups in the model development? And also, before we deploy the model, we're going to conduct a certain pre-deployment audits on data sets and models to identify, is there any potential for biases within the data sets, because of course we want to ensure the fairness. If you further look as well on the monitoring tools, we have implemented some kind of automated tools. For example, we have a quick site that helps us keep the track of our AM metrics for all projects in the real time. And if we see some deterioration, we can have the automatic flags to know that to us that things are happening, that things are changing or different than expected. So we are setting up. I think this is never an end story, because the regulations are changing. So this is always an ongoing process for us, setting up of different monitoring pipelines, because we want to track different metrics. Is it the accuracy or precision or recall of our models? We want to detect the drift, because that's going to be a negative flag for us. All of that to ensure that we have a continuous model evaluation and the real-time insights into what is happening. On explainability and interpretability, that's some precautions that we need to take as well, especially in the development phase, because interpreting model prediction can be difficult because of its complexity. So for us, what is one of the things that we try to do is always to use the most straightforward models whenever it's possible, because they can provide better explainability. And we are trying, of course, to provide training and documentation that helps end users understand the outcomes that the models are giving. And finally, as I already flagged a few times, AI is never meant to build itself. We need to have the human in the loop to monitor development and validation, because from that side, and from that side, actually, Clario is great organization, because we have a huge science team with the experts, because and then with them we can always collaborate, because I don't think it's always only on the AI engineer who is building the system responsibility. We need to collaborate always with the experts in order to build the expert AI that we are actually building across the whole organization. And all of this, for example, is the responsibility of AI validation team, who reports to me and who is managing that all of these processes are running properly and assuring the compliance with the regulations. Next slide, please. Finally, one of the last concepts that also Lauren already mentioned is the AI literacy. That's important topic also for complete AI regulation, because organizations who are working in the AI space needs to ensure the AI literacy of the staff. So AI literacy is becoming more than only kind of a best practice internally, it's also becoming a regulatory expectation. To meet these requirements, we have a couple of different activities, such as awareness programs across the organization, regular presentations on the internal town halls. But two maybe good examples that I would mention is that every time somebody new onboards to the company, so we have this program every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks there is an onboarding session. We already there start talking about AI, introducing the AI. And also when we meet the customers, we also try to schedule. So in our regular governance meetings with the customers, we are including AI as one of the regular topics as well. Of course, this is not only to be compliant with the regulations. It's actually also our way to show that we are delivering trustworthy AI solutions that will further inspire the confidence from the customers, from the partners, and the oversight bodies, of course. Next slide, please. As I'm sure I'm getting you tired, so this is my last slide, I promise. Kind of what is the list of the things that we do to handle existing systems. Some of you may also work on it yourself or developing, so I kind of have a to-do list. What we did, we created a catalog of existing all AI models in our production, and then we looked how are we using it, how to determine the scope and compliance of all these models. It's a work in progress, obviously, for us, because we continue to develop more things, and we continue to learn about new AI regulations as well, how to comply better. Then we are identifying which risk categories we are falling into, and then sort of an action plan on how to be compliant with those categories. We have, of course, paying attention to all the compliance deadlines, and what and when is becoming in force, and we are adapting our procedures as well to meet regulatory requirements. So everything I spoke today about, is it a data management, risk assessment, and everything, this is all a work in progress for us to become better and be compliant. And finally, also what I mentioned, setting up the monitoring systems, that's very important, because we want to real-time follow what is happening with our metrics. We want to have the dashboard that can monitor that, and not only, again, for the compliance reasons, but also for our own reasons. Like, we want to see how well something performs in reality versus when we build. With this, I want to hand over back to Todd.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks, Marco. Super clear and informative there. Let me close us out with a specific example or two to illustrate some of the principles that we've just been talking about. In the responsible use framework, there was one principle I highlighted regarding the importance of minimizing AI-induced bias. I want to talk a bit more about this. Another term you'll hear or have probably heard is AI hallucination, right, on the same spectrum, where essentially the tool doesn't know the answer, but it gives you an answer anyway. And there's different sources for these types of bias or hallucination. But most commonly it occurs simply when an AI tool wasn't trained properly to answer a question that it's now being asked. So rather than say, I don't know, it simply gives an answer based on its essentially its best guess. But the key here is it doesn't tell you that it's taking a best guess. It doesn't give you a confidence necessarily. So if a tool's developed well, it's going to perform well. If I guess I could emphasize this is really where that collaboration Marco was referring to in terms of the science team and the R&D team working together to develop, a list of potential use cases, and then making sure that the training process, the training data set and validation data set, they will fit all of those, potential use cases. That probably makes sense, but it's also definitely a bit of an abstract explanation or concept. So let me give a couple, maybe a hypothetical example, at least to illustrate this. Imagine you want to develop a tool to detect the most common quality issue with ECGs, and that's left and right arm lead reversal. So a technician sees the wire that's labeled RA, they pick it up, with their right hand, and they put it directly onto the patient's left shoulder. We have millions of ECGs in our database. We have thousands of examples, therefore, of limb lead reversal. So certainly we have sufficient data to train a tool to be able to detect those. So hypothetically, we go ahead and we develop this, we do some validation testing. We're super proud of the performance metrics because we've trained it on such a huge data set. And then we deploy that tool in an asthma study that enrolls pediatric and adolescent patients. But we trained that tool only on adult ECGs from adult studies. So it's a classic setup for AI-induced bias. The tool isn't actually familiar with limb lead reversal pattern in a 6-year-old, but it's going to apply the knowledge from adult ECGs in interpreting that ECG from the 6-year-old. And obviously, it's going to underperform relative to expectations. That's an example where lack of diversity from an age standpoint becomes problematic in a training data set. You could imagine similarly for ethnicity or race or gender, that could be the case. The disease itself, if we train a tool to detect liver metastases, liver tumors, and we train it on prostate and colon cancer studies where there were liver metastases, and then we deploy that tool into a breast cancer study, we don't really know for sure that breast metastases look the same to this tool as prostate and colon metastases. Or what about a primary cancer, a liver cancer that actually develops in the liver? Can it detect that just as well? Again, if that's a potential use case, the training data set needs to account for that and handle accordingly. So transparency to how a tool is developed and trained really is what ensures that it will be responsibly deployed. I could go on and on with different examples here on the slide, but in the interest of time, just want to emphasize the, again, the importance of that collaboration between the AI developers in R&D and also the scientific team as well in thinking through those use cases. Go to the next slide. So that does bring us to the end here. I won't read through all of this, but just to highlight a few key takeaways. Points 1 and 3 here call out how critical it is to be cognizant of the evolving regulatory landscape. You heard very well from Lauren going through this and calling out the considerations there. The other pieces here really highlight those elements of the responsible use framework, essentially cognizance of data privacy considerations, considerations for minimizing bias and mitigating risk. And then that last piece that I closed with, which is the importance of transparency to how an algorithm was developed. We have a fair number of questions that have come in. Unfortunately, it looks like I don't think realistically we can get through much here from a Q&A perspective. So in respect of everyone's time, what I will do is ensure that Marco and Lauren and I respond to each of you individually offline by email to make sure your questions do get answered. And I think at this point, therefore, Ryan, I will turn it over back to you to help close us out.
Well, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation today. We have reached the end of the presentation with our time, unfortunately, but if you're interested in hearing more from Clario, you can register for their next webinar titled From Symptoms to Solutions, Enhancing Interstitial Lung Disease, ILD, Trials with Next-Gen Assessments, which is scheduled for Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. And you can use a link that I'll put in the chat box, or of course, visit xtalks.com. Know that if we couldn't attend to your questions, the team here at Clario will follow up with everyone. Or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the contact information that will be up on the screen. I want to thank everyone for participating and submitting your questions, though. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. For those watching on LinkedIn Live event, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and then gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you all found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thanks, Ryan.